appreciate all of you leaning into the first of four workshops that we put together with Michelle Wax. And I wanted to start by letting you know that in the January timeframe, I got visibility to a documentary that Michelle had worked on, and Nadine Malik and I had reached out to Michelle and had some conversation. And in discussions with Michelle, some things resonated with us very, very well. And that, when we talk about happiness in the workplace, we think about energy levels, we think about engagement, we think about social interaction, both with our associates and our clients, and, the impact that has overall on productivity and performance and contribution levels. And, the more we talked with Michelle, we thought how cool it would be to put together a series with her. And I'm going to certainly let her explain some background on that in just a moment. But this will be the first of four workshops with Michelle. And this is focusing on the science of happiness and how to use it really to your advantage. We talk to our customers so often about driving productivity and engagement and using data to get there for organizational enhancement. But we also think about doing it in a positive way. So with respect to mental wellness and really building a positive mindset, that's kind of the key underlying reasons that we started to build out this workshop series. So with that, I wanted to introduce to you Michelle Wax, who's the founder of the American Happiness Project. And Michelle, it's a pleasure to see you and talk with you again today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can share my deck. The first thing I want to mention, as I share my screen, my face is going to get really small in the top right-hand corner. So to make that a little bit bigger, what you can do is go to View Options. That'll be at the top of your screen, right where it says Michelle Wax is sharing her screen or you're viewing her screen. There'll be a button for View Options. You can click on that, click the side-by-side mode, and then once you go into side-by-side, it'll allow you to drag out the corner of my face, so that makes my face a little bit bigger, a little more engaging, instead of just staring at a screen as we go through. So today we're going to be going through the science of happiness, and throughout it going to be breaking you guys off into a couple different breakout rooms just for brief exercises that can connect with one another as we go throughout the course of it. So a little bit of background on myself. I am the founder of American Happiness, as Tom mentioned, and really since 2018, we have been working with individuals, companies, schools all across the country to really strengthen mental wellness, to create more joy, more energy, more fulfillment, lower stress, lower those more negative emotions in the everyday. And what we really focus on is the things that you can control, because obviously a lot of life is outside of our control, right? What people think of us, what they don't think of us, outside world events, right? What's happening with the company, what's not happening. A lot of this is outside of our control at the time. So really our focus is on sharing tangible strategies that you can start implementing today that are actually going to make an impact long term. We get into the science behind why they actually make an impact, even though they might seem simple and straightforward. And, also sharing the knowledge of all the research we've done. So the documentary that we filmed back in 2019 was filmed throughout all 50 states. And really, I personally was interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people all across the country, all different walks of life, all the different income levels and backgrounds and job titles and locations on how they're creating happiness in their everyday lives. And we really focused on what they were doing internally, again, what's in their control, that is not allowing external factors or circumstances to dictate their level of happiness. And I think a lot of the time we hear from the outside world or perhaps people in our lives that it's really difficult to be happy right now, that all these things should be making us feel a certain way. And so we were really curious to capture how people all across the country, again, all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, are really taking back control of their happiness levels, their energy levels, their stress levels, and are creating the emotions daily that they want to be feeling, not allowing other people or the news or circumstances to dictate that for them. So our documentary was released, at the end of February, so it's available now if you guys want to watch it after this. But throughout the course of our series here, we're going to be going through a variety of different topics. and really sharing that research as well as the strategies that are actually working out in the country. So as we were traveling about, went to every single state in America. We were doing a lot of informal interviews, like you see here with me and Kenny in Anchorage, Alaska. We were doing more informal interviews at bars, at restaurants, right? Kind of anywhere out in the world where we could grab someone for a couple minutes and ask them a few questions. But we were also doing a lot of more formal interviews that were lasting for anywhere around the range of 45 to 60 minutes. So we were really getting deep into the stories. Here I am with Joe in New York, and he's actually featured in the documentary as well. And really capturing, how they raised from what unfortunate circumstances, right? Stressful circumstances, things not going according to plan, because obviously those things are going to come up. But how do you rise from that instead of allowing it to plummet you, or just to kind of wake up every day and feel that stress and that worry and that self-doubt? So we interviewed a variety of different people. These are just a couple that are featured in the documentary. Monroe from Maryland had been in jail before, right? Austin had his house blown away by a tornado in Kentucky. June had stage 3 cancer. And Veronica just wasn't really feeling fulfilled in day-to-day life. So we wanted to capture, a variety of different struggles or, situations that people were dealing with, and what they were doing, again, that was within their control to rise from that and to really get to a place where they're waking up, they're feeling that energy, they're being productive, right? They're feeling that joy each and every day of their lives. Of course, things are going to come up that are stressful, that don't go according to plan, but the difference here is that they're able to get out of that state much, much quicker than someone who is not implementing these strategies. So really what was interesting to me when I first got into this space, because before I started American Happiness Project, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, and I had started 2 companies in the food industry here. And that was pretty much my dream since I was a kid. I had the lemonade stand, I sold cookies with my brothers and had the lemonade as well at the corner of our street growing up. And that was really my dream, right? My goal in my life was to start a food company, build that up. And I thought that's what I wanted to do with my life. And I reached this point where, I worked hard, I'd gone after what I wanted. And looking into, the companies I started, one was a cookie catering company. The other was a kitchen incubator space. So we helped other companies start and grow their food businesses. They had a place to produce their product, but we also taught workshops and classes around the business side of things. And, I reached this point where looking in, many people were coming up to me saying, wow, this is amazing. This is so successful. You must be so happy. And I found myself feeling extremely, extremely guilty and kind of didn't understand what was happening in my brain, because I found myself waking up with the stress, with the worry, with the self-doubt. And I didn't understand why, because my entire life I had really been taught and sold that you work hard, you get what you want, and then you'll be happy, right? And so I personally started digging into the neuroscience of happiness, which is what we're going to get into today at a high level, and really made a tremendous impact in my life. And it ties perfectly in with the practical psychology research we've done all across the country now. So we're going to take the science, we're going to pair it with those tangible strategies, and you guys are going to walk away today, first of all, hopefully connecting with one another and being able to share, what you're going to start implementing, but also those strategies that are just going to take a couple minutes in your day to implement. So we're going to first get into the neuroscience behind happiness levels, what's happening in the mind due to it. The number one factor that we found throughout the country that really Americans are attributing to long-term happiness and fulfillment, and also the dangers of positive thinking. And this is something I like to call out right away because, happiness is in our brand name. It can be seen as a very fluffy topic, right? And a lot of times, often in this space, you get pushed to, oh, just think positive, right? Just think about the best case scenario, just kind of force your mind into that. And we're going to get into why that doesn't work too well or very well at all, and what you can do instead that'll be more effective. And finally, those simple things that you guys can start doing today to start using the brain's wiring to your advantage and creating more happiness and joy day to day. So as we go about, I'm going to integrate those breakout rooms. So I'll give you guys a heads up as we're breaking out and send out a simple prompt question to get you guys connecting. But until then, just sit tight and enjoy the knowledge coming at you. So I want to take you guys back, way back to our primal times. We were really first created as human beings. We were first wired, right? And so picture yourself as this, very primal human being living a long, long time ago. And what were your top priorities, right? As you go about your day-to-day life, your top priority was really to likely keep yourself safe and to keep yourself alive, right? We had to be on high alert for wild animals about to attack us, really anything that could hurt ourselves, hurt our families. And it was this very primal instinct that was embedded into us, embedded into our wiring, because it kept us safe and it kept us alive. And your brain was wired to protect you. It was wired to keep you safe, wired to keep you in that space where you felt comfortable, and really to, allow for, if something was a threat in your environment, for you to detect it and detect it quickly and respond to it. So we're really at a battle with our primitive wiring for natural happiness, because we are taught that, we should just naturally arrive at happiness. But what happens is that because your brain is wired in this very primal way of looking out for what could go wrong, right? Looking out for that threat, looking out for what could be better in our environment, your brain is not naturally inclined to go to a place of happiness, opportunity, gratitude, positivity naturally. It's actually wired to go to a more negative place. And so this is why it's really not your fault, right? If you feel that stress, that worry, that anxiety, that self-doubt, it's really just the way that your brain is naturally wired. And this is why we see a lot of that out in the world today, because the majority of human beings' brains, unless you've actively worked on this, are wired to go to that place of thinking, worst case scenario, what could go wrong? What could be better, right? We're always looking kind of on that more negative end. And this is also why, if you have an idea, or perhaps you want to try something new in your life, right? In any area of life, right? You have an idea, you want to go after something new, you're likely going to talk yourself out of it or start to second guess yourself if you think about it for longer than a minute or two, right? Has this ever happened to you where perhaps you have a new idea, maybe you want to try out something new, but the more you think about it, or maybe mention it to a family member or a friend, they start to kind of poke holes in it, right? This is because your brain is wired to do that, right? It's wired to keep you in that familiar space, in that comfort. And so anything that seems new or, different to your brain, it's really going to start to talk you out of it, even if that place of comfort, that place of security or familiarity that you're in right now, or you have been at one point, is not making you the happiest. All right. So this was interesting, for me to find out personally, right? Because I mentioned before, I was in that place where I was waking up, I was feeling the stress, the worry, the self-doubt, these more negative emotions. But I wanted to find out, is there a way to get out of this state, right? The majority of the world is walking around with this default primal wiring. This is why there's a lot of negativity out there, a lot of stress, a lot of this in the news and media we see as well. And yes, there is a way. That's what we're going to get into today, how to actually start rewiring the mind, how to actually start using this to your advantage instead of letting kind of this more primal wiring take over. And switching gears a little bit, getting into our research across the country, right? Interviewing all these different people all across the country, really want to discover, what are they attributing to long-term happiness, where for the most part, they're waking up, they're energized, they're excited. Of course, everyone's going to have a bad day or a bad week, but how do they get out of it, right? For the most part, they're more happy than they're not, right? Their default mindset is happiness, is opportunity, is positivity, rather than not. And that number one factor was a positive mindset. And how I define mindset is really the filter that your brain is processing the world with, right? It's your internal filter. It's how you're interpreting the world, yourself, your circumstances with. And it could be positive or negative. It could be somewhere in between. Everyone's going to have a different mindset, of course, because everyone's gone through different experiences and has had, different things happen to them throughout the course of their life. And this was really interesting for me to discover because, I had reached a point where, as I mentioned before, had been told growing up and really throughout the course of life in general, that happiness is in the future, right? You have a goal in mind, you have that accomplishment or that achievement you want to reach. Maybe it's more on the personal side of getting married, buying the house, starting a family, right? Maybe it's more on the professional side, getting the promotion, the job title, the amount of money that you want, right? Starting a business, then you'll be happy. And so it's really interesting to find out that actually that doesn't matter as much as how your brain is internally processing what's happening day to day in your life. So there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of potential to really take where you're at right now, wherever that is, and start improving it for the better to create more joy, create more energy, really whatever emotion that you want to have more of. And so we started digging into, the science, the scientific research that's also been done by this, because our research was more qualitative, right? We were creating a documentary, we were hearing stories, we were pulling out themes, but it's not as quantitative as, getting a survey results, getting those stats in. And so looking into the other research that's been done around happiness, what we found is that it's been shown that only about 10% of your happiness levels long-term depend on external circumstances, right? Anything like your income level, job title, all those things I just mentioned, right? Material things, location, your level of quote unquote success. And let me know if this has ever, happened to you, but many of us, probably at least a couple of times in your life, you've reached a point where you've perhaps achieved that goal, or you've reached that stage in life, or you reach the achievement or the accomplishment. And what happens once you reach that goal, right? Maybe it was getting the job title you finally wanted. Maybe it was having a certain amount of money in your bank account, right? What happens is that you reach that, you probably have a short dose of happiness, right? We're going to get that spurt of happiness, of joy. But a couple days or a couple hours later, very often we level out to roughly the same level of happiness we were experiencing before that achievement, that accomplishment, that goal, right? And so you've experienced this in your own life. Only about 10% of long-term happiness is dependent on those external circumstances. But in the society we're living in today, a lot of emphasis is placed on those external things, right? Whether it's what's happening in the world, what's happening in the news, right? What's happening with the people around you. But your long-term happiness really depends a lot more on how your brain is internally processing and viewing the world, not as much those external things. And this really is your mindset, right? It's been shown throughout these research studies that your mindset accounts for at least 50 to 55%. This is a fairly conservative number. Some studies have shown this to be even a little bit higher of your long-term happiness levels, right? How your brain is internally processing what's happening in your life and around you as well. And so this is very, very powerful because how your brain is really configured and wired, and this interpretation affects your long-term happiness, and it's entirely within your control, right? External things a lot of the time are outside of our control. We can always work on really crafting this more positive mindset that we found is the number one factor across the country for long-term happiness and fulfillment. And there's also a lot of other great benefits, right? You're going to have more energy. We're going to get into that more in a later workshop. Higher productivity, more likely to get promoted, right? You're going to live longer. All these different things have been attributed to having a positive mindset. But our brain's natural mindset is not helping with happiness, right? We go back to that primal place of thinking what could go wrong, what's not happening, right? All these more negative aspects. And I was chatting with someone the other day who, they've been really struggling recently, and they were saying to myself, Michelle, or to myself, they were saying, Michelle, I have one stressful thought, right? Maybe they read a news article, they get an email they didn't really want to get, or it's not ideal, and they start to spiral, right? They spiral of thinking all the things that are going wrong or could go wrong, and their mind just starts kind of going on this rampant spiral of all the things that are stressful in their life. And so we're going to get into how to stop those patterns and start to reconfigure, rewire the mind. So lasting happiness can really only be created through the training of the mind, which is what we're going to get into, how to start creating this positive mindset that, again, is that number one factor, has been shown through scientific research, that is the majority of your happiness levels long term. So the reason that this is even possible, to take this more primal negative mindset and create a positive mindset, right? One that's going to the opportunity, it's going to the gratitude, it's going to the meaning, it's going to the positivity, is because of neuroplasticity. And this is a fairly new concept in the scientific community. Up until a couple decades ago, most scientists believed that once you reach a certain age in your life, that's just who you are as a person, right? That's just your personality. That's just what you believe and who you are. And it's actually been shown now, decades later, to be just the opposite. Your brain is constantly evolving, constantly changing. So no matter where you're at in your life, right, no matter what age, no matter what stage in life, you can always start crafting these neural pathways, which we're going to get into, to really use to your advantage. So to illustrate this point a little bit more, I want to illustrate this for you. So if you think about the last time that you were going for a walk in the woods or going for a hike, right, maybe on a mountain or a hill or anything in the woods, you'll notice that when you arrive at the park or at the mountain, there's generally a pretty carved out pathway, right? It's mulched down, like you can see in the photo here. It's carved out, right? It's padded down. It's pretty obvious. That's the easiest path to go down. That's where you start. But as of course you walk along the trail, you're going to see there's other trails to branch off onto, right? Other trails to branch off onto. Some are clearly marked. There's going to be a trail marker or a sign. Other trails, you're not really sure if it's a trail or not. I know I've personally walked down these many times and had to turn around, right? You kind of see maybe a couple footprints, a couple sticks in the way, but you start going down at about halfway, 3/4 of the way down, you realize, oh, this actually isn't going anywhere. You turn back around, you go back to the main trail, you go down a different one, right? So I want you to picture walking throughout these trails, walking in the forest, throughout the mountain, and then make it the most complex series of trails you could ever imagine. So millions and millions of trails, right? All tied together, all being carved out, all being overgrown, right? This constant forest, everything's changing, everything's growing, everything's adapting. That is the human mind. That is the human brain, right? It's all these trails, millions and millions and millions and millions of what are called neural pathways. And the way that these paths are formed, right, are through your thought process. So every single time you have a thought, you are blazing out a trail in the forest of your mind. All right. And so this is the best photo I could find to illustrate this point here. But imagine that glowing orb is your thought. And whatever pathway it's going down, whether it's negative, whether it's stressful, whether it's, going to the opportunity or the gratitude, you're carving out or you're reinforcing these pathways every single day, constantly, right? With all of your thousands and thousands of thoughts you have every single day. And we have up to 60,000 thoughts per day. So there's a lot of opportunity to start using this to our advantage. And these neural pathways that are all connected, right? They're just like a forest, all connected, millions and millions and millions. They construct your mindset. They construct that interpretation of the conversation you just had, of the email you just received, right? Of all these different things happening out in the world. And these neural pathways are really your habits of thinking, feeling, and acting. And this is something we'll get into in a later workshop. But really, most people think of habits as forms of acting, right? You either work out or you don't. You eat healthy or you don't, right? You wake up early or you don't, right? But we also have a lot of habits of thinking and feeling as well, right? What's your first thought when you wake up in the morning? How do you generally respond to a stressful situation, right? All of these things are embedded in the mind, and they're really constructed in this forest. Now, this forest also determines a lot of other things, right? It's how you respond to events. It's how you approach life, the meaning you're creating each and every day, right? The joy you're feeling, the interpretation of conversations. I don't know if you guys have ever done this or had this happen in your life, but for me, it's happened plenty of times where you have a conversation, you thought it went really well, right? Or maybe you thought it went poorly. And it turns out the person you were speaking to had just the opposite thought, right? They either thought it went really well or not so good, right? Also, if something is good or bad, And I'll give you guys a quick story here to illustrate how your mindset is really interpreting everything throughout the course of your life. I mentioned I live in Boston, and there's been kind of lines outside the post office recently, and so I had to mail out a package, and I'm waiting in the line, and I noticed that there was a couple in front of me just recently. This was, I think, Tuesday, and they're just really not pleased to be in that line, right? They're clearly aggravated. They're kind of taking it out on each other. They're just miserable to be in that line. And then I turned around behind me, and there's a woman who's standing in the exact same line in the exact same post office, right? And she brought a book to read, right? She anticipated that might not be the most pleasant, quote unquote, experience. Might as well bring a book and make it a bit better, right? And so here these three people are, right? These two groups. They're in the exact same situation, exact same environment, yet they're having completely different experiences. And this is really the power of mindset, of how your brain is wired, comes into play. So the reason I'm harping on thought process so much, and really why we're going to get into this really deeply today, is because really everything begins with your thought process. If we take a couple seconds here and I ask you the question, what's your next thought going to be? Try to think of your next thought that you're going to think. Probably can't think of anything, right? Because a thought appears essentially out of nothing, right? So everything begins with your thought process. Your thoughts lead to your beliefs, right? What you believe about yourself, the world, the people around you. And of course, beliefs lead to actions. If you don't believe something's possible, if you don't believe that's who you are as a human being, if you don't believe it can be done, you're never going to take action on it. Or you're going to take action that is not your all, right? That doesn't really lead to much. It's kind of a half-hearted action. And then, of course, actions lead to outcome, right? The outcome of your life, of your circumstances as well. Now, every single time you have a thought, you're reinforcing a trail in your mind. And the important thing I want to note here is that in the same way that you can carve out new trails that are going to a place of opportunity, joy, happiness, right? Whatever it is, inner peace, calm. You can also allow trails that are not serving you anymore, right? Maybe trails that are stressful, trails that are going to that self-doubt or that worry, to overgrow and make it harder for your brain to go down those pathways. And the brain will always go down the easiest path because it's designed to conserve energy. And so the harder you can make it to go down those pathways of stress, uncertainty, worry, right? All those more negative things. And the more you can make it easier for it to go down the other pathways towards the more positive emotions, joy, energy, right? Fulfillment, meaning, positivity, becomes very, very powerful. So as we go throughout, the rest of this and get a little more interactive with it, why don't you just think about, where your trail's leading you currently? And again, no matter where you're at today, you can always configure really the trails in your mind, no matter what age you're at, no matter what stage you're at. It just takes consistent effort to do. And it's really not that hard. It just takes consistent effort to do. So let's get tactical. How do we actually start doing this? It starts with self-awareness. So how I define self-awareness is really being conscious of what you're thinking about as you're thinking about it. And this is actually fairly difficult to do because from before, we have up to 60,000 thoughts per day, right? So there's a lot going through our minds. And whatever we want to change, we really have to bring to the surface, right? Really have to separate it from the day to day in order to make a change. And there's a great podcast that gets more deeply into the neuroscience. It's recorded by, or it's hosted by a professor at Stanford who is a neuroscientist. And it's called the Huberman Lab. He gets deeper into why self-awareness is so powerful, even though it seems really simple to do. So I recommend checking out his podcast if you'd like to go deeper into this. So how to do this is to start tracking your thoughts for one day. And we have a worksheet that we can share with you guys as well if you'd like that. But essentially every couple hours, I want you to track what are you thinking and how is it making you feel. So you can just take out a piece of paper, right? Every couple hours, ideally setting an alarm on your phone or a reminder in your calendar to make it easier for your brain to remember. But write down, what are you thinking about? How's it making you feel? Okay. So throughout the course of the day, what do you think about when you wake up, when you check your email, during lunch, when you're in meetings, when you're with certain people, just throughout the course of the day? You can even do this for a couple days as well if you want some more touch points to check in with. But the second part is that once we become aware of those thought patterns that are not helping, right, that are causing stress, maybe it's every time you engage with a certain person or you read a certain type of content, you engage with a certain type of content, we want to break and replace the pattern, right? Because we essentially want to stop that blazing orb, right, in that photograph from barreling down a path in our mind that is not helping anymore. We want to reroute it to a new pathway. So once you have your list of thoughts, once you've tracked your thoughts for one day, again, every couple hours writing in, what are you thinking about and how is that making you feel, right? These can be just a couple of words. You don't have to take too long to do it. When you start to go down that less than ideal path, right, what you're going to do is maybe you have a stressful thought, maybe it's a worrisome thought, whatever it is for you. We're going to break that thought pattern and we're going to reroute it to a new pathway. There's a very simple 3-step process to do this. Number 1 is physical motion. Number 2 is we're going to actually call out that we're having that thought. Again, bringing it to the surface. And then we're going to reroute and reinforce the pathway so that we're carving out new trails in our mind that are eventually forming that mindset, right? That's going to go to a more positive place. So what physical motion does is it interrupts the thought pattern, right? Because so often there's so many things happening that we can kind of just stay in our own minds and stay in these thought patterns. So when you realize that you're having a more negative thought or one that's not really helping go towards happiness, do some type of physical motion to snap yourself out of it, essentially. So you can actually snap, you could clap your hands, you could tap your foot on the ground if you're, in a meeting. If you are really can't do anything, physically with your hands or feet, just take a deep breath in and out, right? Any type of physical motion that's going to bring it to the surface. The second part is that we're going to bring awareness to it, right? So we're going to call it out. If you're feeling stressed, either say it out loud, write it down, or you could write it in your phone as well, in the Notes app, right? This is essentially as you're tracking. And then worst case, if you really, can't do any of those, just say it in your head. Say it, I'm feeling stressed, but inside your own mind. It's better if you can say it out loud or better if you can write it down. But of course, sometimes we're talking with someone face to face. We're not going to write down in front of them. We're not, of course, going to say it out loud right in front of them. So whatever you can do in that moment to bring awareness and call it out is perfect. Then we're going to reroute and reinforce to create those new neural pathways. All right. So this is a 3 simple process. Before we get into our first breakout room exercise for you guys, I'm going to get into the dangers of positive thinking for a little bit. So a lot of the times, if we're having perhaps a stressful thought, a negative thought, thinking everything's going awry or going wrong, if we force ourselves to think positively and to essentially do a 180, it's very dangerous to the brain because the brain is not going to believe you. So you're essentially losing trust within yourself, which is not effective. It's not effective in the short term. It's not effective in the long term. So instead of doing that 180 and going from a place of more negative thinking to positive, what we're going to do is we're going to route to neutral thinking. Very, very powerful concept that, in my opinion, is not highlighted enough kind of in this space. So from a place of negative, we're going to go to neutral, and then eventually from neutrality, we're going to go to positive. And a lot of our thoughts are negative naturally. So if you're having these, again, it's not your fault. This is the way that the brain is wired. But the interesting thing is that negative thinking is a lot more powerful than positive thinking, right? So it's more important to get away from negative thinking, to get to a place of neutrality, even more than it is to get to a place of positivity, right? And there's a really great podcast on this as well. The guy who you see on the screen here, Trevor Moawad, if you look him up on the Ed Milet podcast, he goes into this deeper about all the research he's done around negative thinking and really how powerful it is. He also has another stat around this that basically times these numbers 5 by 7 by 10. So if you say a negative thought out loud, it becomes 10 times more powerful, 50 to 70 times more powerful than just saying it in your own mind. So it's a lot more powerful than we're often taught to believe. So example negative thoughts, there's obviously millions and millions of them, but a couple examples here today are that'll never happen. Everything's horrible right now. We're at a disadvantage here. I'm such a mess. And the interesting thing here is that even if you're saying this in kind of a self-deprecating way, I'm such a mess, your brain is still registering that. So it's ideal not to do that at all, even if it is in more of a joking way. Your brain really can't tell the difference. Example, neutral thoughts are getting to that place of neutrality, right? So we're going to find a way through. I can learn how to adapt. I have to support myself unconditionally. I take setbacks as temporary and I bounce back quickly. All right. Another great neutral thought is I am a human being. That essentially covers most things. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to break you guys off briefly, and we're going to just share with one another. Feel free to unmute yourself when we're in the breakout rooms, of course, and share what's a negative thought that you've experienced in the past week and what's a neutral thought that you can incorporate to replace it. I'll put these questions in the chat as well as I will broadcast them out to you guys once I break you off, but let me go ahead and break you off here. If you haven't used this feature before, what you're going to have to do is to accept the invite. All right, so once I break you guys off right now, make sure you accept the invite and we'll go from there. So once we shift from that negative place to more neutral place, what we're going to do, of course, once you get to that neutrality place, is go to positive. So positive thoughts are something like, I always figure out a way to make things happen. This is an opportunity. I believe in myself. There is meaning I can find in this. All right. So there's obviously millions and millions of these as well. But more important to get to that place of neutrality, more than it even is to get to a place of positivity. If you're currently in that more stressful, worrisome, doubtful, whatever emotion it is for you. All right. And again, it's very, very powerful to track those thoughts and start rerouting them. Even though it seems simple, it seems straightforward, it probably seems a little weird and uncomfortable too, right, to do. I certainly was never taught to do this growing up, but really everything begins with thoughts. And so the more that we can craft them to start using it to our advantage, it's going to improve our beliefs about ourselves, about our companies, about the people around us. It's going to improve our actions, which of course affect the outcome. All right. And again, you're crafting that force of your mind with every single thought that you have. So now we're going to get into daily practice. And at the very end, I'm going to get into, why these strategies really work, or what's happening in the brain when you start implementing these. It only takes a couple minutes to do, just about 2 minutes to do each of these. And it's very, very powerful because that's really all the time it takes to start changing that baseline level of happiness. So gratitude journal and gratitude spotlights are, taking note of what you're grateful for or appreciative for in your life. And you've likely heard of this, but the reason why this works so much, right? Now we know the science of the brain and actually how these pathways are formed that are physically changing the brain is that every single time you write down something you're grateful for or you share it, right? Every single time you're carving out a new neural pathway or you're reinforcing one that's going to that place as well. Instead of using a journal or in addition to, people have also been doing this with their families. Maybe it's, over coffee or at dinner time. You can do it with your partner. You can do it with friends over a text message thread. It's a great way to do it as well. But just make sure you're highlighting this in your daily life. Another great way to do this is gratitude spotlights. So a lot of companies are starting off their meetings or ending their meetings with, going around and sharing something they're grateful for or appreciative for. You can do this for something in your life, of course, or for a person on your team or in your life. And the important thing about gratitude is to really make sure that you're highlighting the very small things in your life. And most people, when asked about what they're grateful for or appreciative for, what they do is they go to really big things, right? Like their family, their friends, their children, their job, right? Their house, whatever it may be. But you want to actually start looking for very small things. And I'll give you guys an example. Today, I got a new tin of coffee beans from Trader Joe's, and I love coffee. And so I was kind of peeling off that tin foil on top of the can, and that smell of coffee beans just kind of hit me in the face, right? And it was the best moment ever. And I will write that down in my gratitude journal. So it can be very small things that are happening daily. And so I wanted to share, a couple things that you guys are grateful for, and what you anticipate of getting in the way of your own gratitude practice, right? And so what I'm going to do here, let me check the time here. What I'm going to do is we'll just actually share this in the chat. So go ahead and just type in the chat instead, because we have one more breakout room coming up. Feel free to share 2 to 3 small things that have happened, within the past 24 hours, or that you can just feel grateful for that you've experienced or thought of in the past 24 hours. And feel free to just share that in the chat so we can engage with it as we continue on here. The second piece is to really start your day proactively. All right. So most people start their days, tell me if this ever happens to you in the chat as well, but most people start their days off and their alarm goes off on their phone, right? About 80% of America does this. And you look at your phone, you start scrolling through social media, emails, the news, text messages, right? And what happens is your brain immediately gets placed into response mode. Going back to that primal wiring, you immediately are really filtering all the perceived threats in your life, right? Whether it be an unfortunate email coming in or maybe something you read in the news. This is something we're going to get into deeper in a future workshop, is how your brain is interpreting those perceived threats in your environment. But we really get placed into response mode. So it's more important to really start your day proactively and on your own terms. And we had a great article in Forbes about this that you guys can check out on our site if you want to get into this a little bit deeper, but I'm going to give it to you at a high level today. So we recommend, asking yourself 3 morning questions to really start your day off on the right note. And it lets you get ahead of the day, start off on a positive note, and it doesn't really take much time at all. Ideally, you're putting your phone on airplane mode. You're answering these first thing in the morning when you wake up. But if you really don't have time, you can also do it as you're brushing your teeth or making your coffee. Just make sure that you're incorporating them into some place. So number 1 is, what can I look forward to today? What am I looking forward to today? Making sure that you have something in your day. Can be very, very small, but you're excited for, you're energized for. The second question is, what is potential to stress me out today? And how will I respond to it, right? Of course, things are going to come up that we can't anticipate, that are stressful or worrisome. But as much as you can get ahead of those things that might come up that, are potentially stressful, or you're choosing how to respond to something that maybe comes up unexpectedly, getting ahead of that and really starting your day off on that more proactive note is very, very powerful to do. And the third question, which is probably my favorite question, is how do you want to feel at the end of today? And what do you need to do or not do to make that a reality, right? How do you want to feel? Do you want to feel productive? Do you want to feel disciplined? Do you want to feel energized? Do you want to feel happy? Do you want to feel calm, right? Setting that intention of the day and then checking in with yourself throughout the course of the rest of the day can be very, very beneficial. And again, it seems straightforward. It seems simple, but very few people are actually doing this, and it makes such an impact to answer these questions and then check in with yourself. So for our next group exercise, what we're going to do is break off again and, share what's another morning question that you can ask yourself to start the day proactively. Maybe it's something that's, a little more personal in your life or applies more to your career, your profession, right? But what's another morning question that you can start implementing? And I'll break you guys off again. We'll spend just a minute or 2 here, and you'll have to accept it again, and I'll blast out the question. All right, and as everyone comes back in, feel free to share in the chat what your question is, or what it will be moving forward. Rosalia already shared hers, love it, and we'll keep going here. Feel free to, of course, use anyone else's and add those to the list for the start of your day. So letters of appreciation are also extremely, extremely powerful. This can, of course, be a traditional letter, but it can also be a text message. It could be an email. I have a friend who, she's been going through a really stressful time at work, and she had to give this big presentation recently. And after the presentation, a coworker sent her a 1-line email, right? It probably took the coworker about 7 seconds to write. But it told her how great of a job she did at the presentation. She really appreciated the content. And it was a super simple thing to do. But my friend has been rereading that email every single morning because she's just been really struggling at work recently. So these notes of appreciation can be really, really powerful and impacting someone's day. And a lot of the times you'll never even know how powerful they were for someone. But we have these free appreciation postcards that you can send at any time. They say you are incredible on the front, and you can put a note on the back. So you can send one of those for free to anyone in the USA at this URL as well. So if you want to send more traditionally in the mail, sometimes if you don't have their address, an email or a text message works too. Consistency is everything with these strategies, right? Good ways to remain consistent is to set alarms on your phone, set it in your calendar, right? Put it next to your bed or on your couch or on top of your remote or on your pillow, right? As much as you can make it easy for your brain is really powerful to do. And as we wrap up today, I want to share a little bit behind the reticular activating system and how this actually works in the brain and how you've likely already experienced it in your own life, but why it's so powerful and why, you know, really, if you're doing these strategies, it's going to filter in more good, more appreciation, more positivity into your own life. So if you guys have ever bought a new car or ever bought an old car, right, you'll find that when you start driving that car around, you see it everywhere, right? And it's not like anyone went out that day and bought the same exact car as you, but because you're focused on it and because it's important to you, you start to see it everywhere, right? Your brain filters in that car into your life because you're focused on it and it's important to you. Another powerful example of the reticular activating system going to work is probably not recently, but at some point in your life, you were in a crowded area, right? Or you were in a loud room. And it was hard to hear the person that you were talking to, right? Maybe it was a networking event or conference. And you have to ask them to repeat themselves a couple times. You're still not really sure what they said, right? But then suddenly, someone from across the room says your name, right? And you instinctively turn. You hear your name when you really shouldn't be able to. And that's because your entire life, your brain has found your name important. And so you focus on it. So it filters in your name into your life when you really shouldn't be hearing it, right? When so many other things are tuned out. And so this is the power of the reticular activating system, right? Whatever you're focusing on, the more and more you do these strategies, the more and more you implement this into your life, your brain is going to filter in more of that into your life, whether that be good or whether it be bad, right? Whether it be negative or positive or somewhere in between. So it's very, very powerful. You're actually changing your brain. So we have a couple minutes here. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll also share our email. So if you have any questions afterwards, I know we have a couple other sessions as well we can always touch upon. Would be happy to answer them. But this is what we went over today. Of course, the neuroscience behind happiness levels, right? That number one factor, the positive mindset, how to start actually creating it in your own life and why it's so powerful to do, even though it seems simple, seems straightforward, but your reticular activating system is filtering things at all moments in time, right? We have millions and millions of things happening in our life. You can't pay attention to me talking right now, a bird flapping its wings outside, and the light fluttering above you, right? Flickering above you. You just can't do it. So your brain filters it to what's important to you and what you're focused on. All right. So again, our documentary is available if you want to check it out. I'll see you at the next workshop.